Hi, everybody. Thanks for being with us here today. My name's Carolyn, and this is Talia.
Hello.
And we are part of the kids team at Our House Grief Support Center. So we're going to talk with you a little bit today about grief and what is this thing called grief. Before we jump in, though, we want to tell you a little bit about the services that we offer in case it's something that you're seeking or if you know somebody in your life who might benefit from some grief support. So we have site-based groups for adults, teens, and children at our centers across LA. So we have a center in Woodland Hills, in West LA, and also Mid-City Koreatown. We have school-based groups for kids and teens. So we go into schools all over Los Angeles and offer free grief groups for kids in their similar age range at schools. We have Camp Erin, an overnight grief camp for kids ages 6 through 17. Talia, you want to say a little bit more about that?
Sure. We typically have 2 weekend-long camps each summer, ages 6 to 17, like Carolyn mentioned. And throughout the weekend, we have both traditional fun camp activities and grief support activities. And you can have a grown-up in your family apply, and we hope to have an in-person session again soon.
Additionally, we have community-based Spanish language groups for adults available. So maybe that's something that a parent or an aunt or uncle might be interested in. And then we have training to the community that we do with our whole team.
So, what is this thing called grief? You might have heard this word before, and if you have, think about where you might have heard this or when you might have heard this. At our house, and for today's presentation, we're really going to talk about grief as all of the thoughts and feelings and behaviors that someone has after someone close to them has died. And at our house, when we talk about grief, we know there is a whole mix of emotions, a whole mix of thoughts and feelings. And when we do projects and activities at camp, we really talk about what are those feelings that are so natural to experience after someone dies, because we really think about it as a natural reaction to a life cycle event, like someone dying in your life.
Exactly. And that being said, we want to honor too that some of you may have experienced a lot of grief around the pandemic, being separated from your friends and being home from school and feeling a lot of isolation and loss of activities. And so that too is a kind of grief, and we honor that. And then we want to be clear that today, the kind of grief we're talking about is grief following when somebody close to you has died. So what you see here on the screen are some natural grief responses. So these are things that are absolutely totally normal to experience when you're going through grief. And so maybe while you're listening today, take note if there are things that you see here that you can relate to. Make a little note that that's something that you've experienced. And maybe you have a friend that you're watching with and you can compare and talk about what that experience has been like. Trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, or an increase in sleeping, right? Maybe you're feeling like you want to sleep a lot more. Changes in eating habits, maybe an increased appetite or decreased appetite, both are normal. Decreased energy or increased feelings of tiredness and sleeping more, right? Or feeling very fatigued, like it's just hard to get from thing to thing in the day. Crying often, or sometimes we hear that people feel really unable to cry, like they feel like it's really hard to let those feelings out. Decreased interest in or withdrawing from friends, family, and activities that you usually like to take part in. Sometimes it can be hard to fully show up for the things that you usually do when you're grieving. Difficulty concentrating. I wonder if this is something that folks who have been in school while they're grieving can relate to. Hard time concentrating, losing focus, or maybe being more forgetful than usual. Maybe you have health problems or things that you're noticing physically, maybe more stomach aches or headaches, or maybe you're a little off balance, clumsiness. That's something that happens too during grief. Impulsive and or destructive behaviors. So if you're noticing that you've had more instincts to try things that are maybe a little bit risky, or maybe even thinking about something like self-harm, these are things that definitely come up, and there's part of that that's a very normal response. And we'll speak in a bit about when we need to pay a little bit more attention to that. Dreams about your person, or maybe an increase in nightmares, and then big feelings that come up around those dreams. Maybe problems listening to parents, teachers, or other authority figures. I imagine some of you can relate to that. And sometimes those feelings can increase when somebody's grieving. And then either a drop in grades or an increase in grades, right? Your grades go up or the grades go down. Some kids we know really focus on their schoolwork when they're grieving because that's a way for them to get through it. And some kids start to have a harder time, and both are normal reactions.
So, we want to talk a little bit about grief in the media. A lot of what we understand about grief and how we view grief is how our family of origin talks about grief, and then this big piece about how grief shows up in the media. So we're going to show a little clip for a moment from the TV show Glee, which some of you may have seen. And it was powerful for us at our house to see this because it was one of the first times in television that an actor in real life, Corey Monteith, died. And then his character in the show, Finn, they wrote into the script that he died as well, so that the actors and his friends could honor him along with the fans and viewers of the show. And this is a little clip of them during that episode where they're honoring Finn's death. So we'll watch a few minutes of that together.
And notice as you're going the different ways that different people in the clip are reacting to their grief. It looks very different.
If I die young, bury me in satin, lay me down on a bed of roses, sink me in the river at dawn, send me away with the words of
He was such a good guy.
Oh,
I'll never get to tell him.
Lord, make me a rainbow, I shine down on the mother.
People keep asking me, how are you feeling? What are you feeling? I have no answers. Honestly, what can you say about a 19-year-old who dies? Everyone wants to talk about how he died too, but who cares? One moment is a life. I care more about how he lived. I'm going to spend my entire life missing him.
Well, I've had just enough time.
He's dead. And all we've got left
So
is his voice in our head.
boys, and now wear my pearls. What I never did is that.
If I start crying, I don't think I'll ever stop.
Oh, if I die young, bury me in satin, lay me down on a
really
bed
not
of
okay.
roses, sink me in the river at dawn, send me away with the words of a love song. Oh. No.
I can still see his face and I can hear his voice so clearly.
And
Do you think
the
that I'll ever
whole
forget it?
world is only okay.
Because I'm afraid that one day I will.
I could offer you a word.
If there's one thing I've learned from Finn dying, it's that shame is a wasted emotion. I'd walk through those doors and I would just say I'm home.
When the evening
And then
shadows in the
happily ever after.
and there's no one there to try.
Parents go on when they lose a child. How do they wake up
I
every
could
day?
hold you
I mean, how do they breathe? How do they...
make you feel my love.
But you do wake up.
I know
And for just a
you
second,
made your mind
you forget.
but I would
And then-
never do you.
Oh, you remember. You don't get to stop
I've
waking up.
known it from the moment
You have to
that
keep
we
on being a parent even though you don't get to have a
go
child
down
anymore.
my way alone. I'd go hungry, I'd go black and blue. I'd go
Seeing him come to the hallway wearing this, it was like Superman had arrived.
No, there's nothing that I
Worley,
wouldn't do
how are you?
to make you feel my love.
I have no idea.
See nothing like me yet. I could make you happy, make your dreams come true. Nothing that I wouldn't do. Go to the ends of the earth for you to make you feel my love. To make you feel my love.
So take a moment, maybe take a few deep breaths, and think about some of the different reactions that you saw in the film. We saw a lot of sadness and tears, We saw anger, someone throwing the bookshelf. We saw someone holding his hairbrush. We often see that sometimes it's comforting for people to have an item from their person who died. They were wearing his jacket and feeling kind of embraced by him through his clothing.
You also see kids having really big emotions, right? Really strong, maybe yelling or crying in a really intense way. And also people talking about how even though they're sitting with this big grief, they're moving through it and they're doing okay, but they still miss him, right? All of that you saw in there were really normal reactions.
A couple other places that we see grief in the media. This is a photo of Mac Miller, who some of you might recognize. And Ariana Grande tweeted a bit of her grief more publicly about how sad and mad she is that Mac Miller died. And we know that a lot of his fans and viewers and people who admired his music really grieved together very publicly. We also see here images from the TV show This Is Us. And we wanted to include them because they do a really great job in the show where there is a set of triplets whose father dies. And each of the kids in the family grieve in a different way. They show their grief in a different way, they express it differently, and they choose to honor their dad in different ways. And that's a good reminder to all of us that even within the same family, everyone has a different way that they grieve or choose to grieve or share those feelings. And that can differ from family to family and even person to person within that family.
So when does grief end? Maybe think for a minute if you have something in mind. Maybe what does your family talk about when they talk about grief? Does it seem like there's a expected time for it to end? Well, one thing that we know from working with grieving families at our house is that it doesn't really end, right? There's no such thing as closure in the way that we sometimes think about it. It certainly changes over time, though, and that's what we know, right? It won't always hurt as badly as it does at the beginning. There's a metaphor that somebody shared with us once about grief is like a cut on your hand, right? At first, it's deep and it's bleeding and it's really painful. And every time you move, it kind of hurts and starts bleeding again. And then over time, it starts to heal, and you have a little scab there, and it's kind of itchy. And maybe if you move too quickly, it opens back up again, but then it comes back together again and starts to heal. And then eventually you have a scar, right? And it doesn't hurt anymore, but it's red and you see it and you can feel it. And every time you see that scar, you remember the time that you got your cut. But most of the time it's just there on your hand and it's not hurting you the same way it did when you first got that fresh cut.
So, like we spoke about earlier, some of you watching this may be grieving yourselves, or you may have a friend or someone in your life who is grieving. We want to talk a little bit about how you might support that person. So, it's common sometimes after someone experiences a death that they take some time off school or work. So, if you're not able to see them in those in between times, we recommend finding ways to connect with them, either on the phone or through other social media, to show that you're really supporting them. Maybe find time to go over to their home if that's something you're able to do during this time, or if not, Zoom or FaceTime or outside time where you can really show up for them and be a listening ear. Also able to support them by attending the funeral or memorial service of their person who died, making sure that you let your close friends know that that's happening, and maybe try and connect with others to all show up for your friend in that time. And really just being a listening ear to what they need. Maybe in the moment they just want distraction and want to play a game with you, and you can show up in that way. Or maybe they really want to talk and share their feelings.
So some other ways that you can support a friend after they return to school. Greet them with warmth and kindness, right? Something big has happened for them, but they still want to be treated the same. And this might have looked a little bit different during distance learning. So maybe think about if there are ways that you found that you were able to show up for friends differently when you weren't able to see them in person. You can offer to do homework together to help them stay on track if they're having a hard time with schoolwork and starting to fall behind. Let them know that with you, talking about it is okay, that you can sit there and listen without judgment and be there for them. And remember that grief is really unique from person to person. Some people's grief lasts their intense grief will last a much longer time than others. Some people will cry a lot, some people won't cry so much, right? And so the experience that your friend is having will look very different from them than it might look from somebody else. And so remember that there's no limit to that process, and it's going to look individual for each person.
And when you are showing up to support your friend, we can think sometimes about the difference between empathy, showing up with empathy, and showing up with sympathy. And there are small differences, small nuances in how those conversations go and how they're received by the person that might be sitting in some pain. So we're going to watch a quick video from Brene Brown, who's a social worker who studies vulnerability and shame and how we talk to each other about those hard topics. And think for a little bit while you're watching the video about what language she's suggesting and what you might use when you talk to your friend next about a painful topic like grief or something else that might be going on for them.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
That last phrase that she said is the most powerful, right? What makes something better is connection.
So what are some ways to cope? These are things that actually other kids and teens have shared with us that are ways that it helps them to cope. And so you might have something of your own that you know of. So maybe jot it down while you're listening to this, or maybe you could share notes with friends after this to find out what works for them. Listening to music, talking to a friend, like we've talked about, maybe journaling, maybe doing some art or drawing. Right. And then there's these are 2 coping skills that we're actually going to show you today that you can use anytime when you're having really big feelings that feel like they're just coming over you. These are things that you can have in your back pocket to do for yourself, to calm yourself down when maybe you don't have a friend or a parent nearby to talk to help sort it out with you. So if you will, follow along with us. I'm going to show you today something called candle flower breathing. Okay. So Talia, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So everybody hold out your hands like this and imagine in one hand you have a flower, and it is the most beautiful flower. It's your favorite kind of flower and it smells amazing. And then in the other hand you have a lit candle, right? So you're holding both of these things, and then On the count of 3, we're going to do this 3 times. You're going to smell your flower for a count of 3. You're going to hold your breath for the count of 3, then blow out your candle for the count of 3. And if it's comfortable for you, close your eyes. And if that's not comfortable, you can keep your eyes open, whatever feels right, okay? So on the count of 3, smell that flower. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Smell, 2, 3. Hold your breath, 2, 3, and blow, 2, 3. One more time. You're gonna smell that flower, 2, 3. Hold, 2, 3, and blow out your candle, 2, 3. It's a magic candle. It lights again after every time. Now this time, put your hands down in your lap and just keep that image in your mind of your flower and your candle. And with those images in mind, take a moment to smell the flower, 2, 3. Hold your breath, 2, 3. Then blow out that candle. And notice if you feel any different afterwards. What we hope you feel is a little bit more calm. Those deep, slow breaths help to calm your central nervous system, which is what's activated when you're having big emotions, right? So here's one more for you to try. Some of you might like one more than the other. And this is called butterfly breathing. So in this one, you're going to take your hands. Okay, Talia, helping me with this. Put your thumbs together and rotate your hands like this. So you have 2 hands facing outward with your palms facing towards your chest, right? And your thumbs crossed. And place them on your chest just like this so that your fingers can tap on your collarbone. And then just like we did for counts of 3, you're gonna take 3 slow, deep breaths while you tap on your collarbone so you feel those sensations moving throughout your body, okay? So breathe in for 1, breathe out for 1, 2, 3. Breathe in, 2, 3, and out, 2, 3. And then one last time, in, 2, 3, and out, 2, 3. And the combination of that breathing and those sensations in your body, again, is affecting your central nervous system to calm you down. So these are things you just have in your back pocket anytime you need it. So we talked earlier about sometimes when you might need to just check in and see if you need some additional support. And so while all of these grief reactions we've talked about are very, very normal, there are times when they can get a little bit intense and start to kind of disrupt your functioning in a way that means maybe you need to check in with some therapy or reach out to an adult or a trusted, another trusted person in your life to see if they can help you find that. So if you're having extreme or unmanageable changes in your mood or behavior, right? So some fluctuations are really normal, but if you start to feel like they're outside of your control in a way that is disrupting your life, that might be something to check in with. Thoughts or urges to hurt yourself or somebody else. So I know we mentioned this before. If you are having thoughts about wanting to hurt yourself, or maybe you've done that before, that's a time to really check in with somebody because that's dangerous and we want to make sure you're safe, okay? Likewise, if you're having thoughts about hurting somebody else, that's a time to let somebody know you're having those thoughts so that they can help you get the support you need around that. Trouble controlling and tolerating big emotions, right? We keep talking about these big emotions, which are normal, but if they're coming at you in a way that feels out of control or is really disrupting kind of your normal functioning, that's a time to check in with somebody. Extreme confusion or trouble with concentration, right? We've talked about how it's normal to feel a little bit confused or have trouble concentrating, but when we say extreme, we mean it's really disrupting you, maybe in school, or you're getting confused about things that you wouldn't normally get confused about. And again, it's disrupting kind of what feels like normal functioning. Let somebody know that that's happening. Feelings of isolation or avoidance of friends and family. If you're feeling really isolated, that's a really lonely place to be. And sometimes these other things that are showing up for you might not feel so easy to reach out about when you're feeling really alone. So see if there is somebody who you can talk to, whether it's a friend or a teacher or a parent. And then feelings of hopelessness, right? That's a time to check in with somebody to let them know that you're having those feelings so that you can try to get some support. And then we have here some additional resources for you. So we hope you have time to look at these. These are the Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available 24 hours a day, every day. So if you're ever having thoughts of suicide, you can call this number at any time and there will be somebody there to answer and support you. Teen Line is something you can call or text to and speak with a peer who can talk with you if you're having these kinds of thoughts and help you get to support if you need it beyond just checking in with somebody. And then additionally, the LA Warm Line is not so much a crisis line like the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, but is a place where you can call or text and just have somebody to talk to about what's going on at any time. So we hope that you can take in these resources, and we hope that you learned something about grief talking with us today, and maybe some ways that you can comfort yourself. And we urge you to reach out to somebody if you're experiencing grief so that they can help get you to some support.
Thanks,
Everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.